Well, with over 3 million views on Twitter, our next guest went viral with his explanation of the movement to defund the police. Have a look at this.
When we say defund the police, there's a lot of people that like to frame it as an anarchist conversation. But what we know as black and brown bodies in this America is that policing never equated to safety for us. I've never felt protected or served by any officers in MPD or any of the other police forces and municipalities that I've visited across this America. So when we say defund the police, for people who cannot understand the nuances in that conversation, what we're saying is revisit public safety.
And here to talk to us more about this growing movement is Ty Hobson-Powell. Welcome to the Ben Robin Robbo Show, Ty.
Thanks for having me.
Look, it's an absolute pleasure. You are a remarkable person, and I'll get to your childhood in a moment. The idea of defunding the police scares a lot of people because I don't think we fully understand what that means. I think a lot of, especially white in the US and middle-class people, would think, well, that means no law and order, and people need a blanket of safety for law and order. What's your message to them?
My response to them is that I would implore them to actually listen to what the people on the ground are saying. You know, we are lovers of peace, and I actually tweeted that earlier today. We would love law and order. The thing is, we don't just want law and order for some, we want it for all. And for far too long, a group of people in the police that has been mandated with protecting and serving has been a group that has terrorized black and brown communities in these United States. You know, when you look at white communities all across this America, all across different locales in America, different states, what you find is that there's an overwhelming presence of safety, but there isn't an abundance of police. But you go into the black and brown communities, and what you find is that there is an abundance of policing, but there isn't an abundance of safety. That right there gives us what we know to be true, which is that policing does not equate to safety. It's resources. It's communities that have grocery stores. It's communities that have the things that would actually make lives matter, that are the safest. You know, Chicago has the most police deployed per 100,000 people for any city in the United States. If policing equated to safety, then Chicago would be the safest city in the United States.
So, Ty, look, the police is part of our very fabric, I guess, of our society. It would be almost like, and I can't think of a good analogy, but it's almost like if we, had no cars or something like that. It's almost an idea that people just can't get their head around. What's the first step in trying to just, get that idea into people's heads as something that could happen, that is something that is really good? Because it's a mammoth exercise to try and get people to realise that, the way that policing is done now is not the right way it should be done.
Well, yeah, so I think, and you saw some of it with my video, right? It is taking language that otherwise may be incendiary. So when people hear defund the police and they see that, sometimes that is sort of too much for them, right? But I think that if we start phrasing it with things like revisit the police, right, and sort of give room for that conversation to happen, that is the first step of it. I think the other part of it, and I acknowledged it in this earlier in this, is that the safest communities don't have the most police. The safest communities have the least police. And so when we look at these equivalencies, we have to understand that safety does not equate to over-policing. As we look at a group of people that is paid by taxpayer dollars to protect and serve, to the extent that there is a whole community that does not feel protected or served, we have to revisit what public safety is in favor of something that resembles justice on a day-to-day, and not just something that results in arbitrary administration of justice. And when we talk about the idea of revisiting the concept of policing, it's something as simple as even the educational requirements of police. Here in this country, there are police that go through academies for a couple weeks and get guns. They can administer the law in real time. Meanwhile, there's a lawyer that has to study for years to know the law and practice it. There is a disconnect. There is a gap.
I just want to say there's something horrific about hearing these stories because we know them to be true. There's documentaries about them. I think it's very clear to me to quickly say that I think the police system in America is definitely different to the police system in Australia. Yeah. But interestingly enough, since the murder of George Floyd, we've seen the Los Angeles and the New York Police Department halve their budget, will have their budget halved. Is that enough to make a difference over there in the States?
You see, so every locale looks different. And every locales' response to how they want to revisit public safety will be different. So the $150 million commitment that I believe Los Angeles received to divest to their communities might be something that works. We don't know. It's sort of a first of its kind sort of thing. When we talk about cuts, when we talk about what exactly revisiting public safety looks like, I think that is specific to locales. You'll have some locales, a smaller town, where it might be easier entirely to get rid of the police. You'll have some locales where maybe abolishing the police looks like a mix of the cahoots model, which we've seen where social workers are deployed for certain things and then officers only for the things that are most necessary. I mean, it is up to the people. That is the beautiful thing about democracy, is that, if your locale decides you want police, well, guess what? You get to have them. But here in Washington, D.C., a city that is majority black and brown, what we know to be true is that policing disproportionately is biased against black and brown bodies. And so to that end, we want a new system here. And that looks like abolishing the current system that we have. But it may not look like that for every locale, and that's fine too.
That's interesting. That's interesting that it's not a one-size-fits-all. But before we go, I really want to ask you this point. There's been a lot of protesting, which has become a real political issue in the US presidential campaign. Trump is using the protests, which he's labeling as violent, and calling the protesters outlaws. What is your response to that kind of depiction of the protesting happening, especially in Portland, Oregon?
I think it's ridiculous. It's ridiculous. What we have to understand is that what we're seeing in the streets is a response to state-sponsored violence. It is the quite literal disproportionate incarceration and murder of black and brown bodies. What you're seeing is a response to that.
Which I think you could be absolutely right, but is there a point that from a political stance, he is motivating his base because those pictures, when you see them, look violent from... it's all the way it's played out, right? So, the police force having to come in, and he's telling mayors to bring in the National Guard. I will fix this problem for him. So he's shaping the narrative to be
the National
problem.
Guard is adding dimensions that don't need to be added
to
protest grounds.
Not arguing with that at all, but where does it become? How do you win the PR battle? So, there's obviously supporters of the Black Lives Matter movement, and you've got the hard right who see this as a political opportunity because what they can show is the perception, and I use the word perception, of violence and buildings being torn down, or, courthouses. So how do you find that perception?
It's humanizing it. It is doing what you guys are doing right now, bringing the thought leaders who are on the ground every day onto platforms to really articulate what it means, to articulate what people are seeing on the news and what it is a reflection of. All too often media, mainstream media on the left and on the right, has done a horrible job of including us in this conversation about what's going on. They would just as soon try to define what a gathering means without calling the organizer who put the gathering together and asking them, right? Mm-hmm. And so it is important to include us as voices because we are very much a part of this political landscape. We very much can demystify a lot of the things that are going on. And I think that the reason why my video went viral is because, like I said, it humanized this sort of concept of defunding the police. It's a phrase
and helped us understand it because we didn't understand what that meant.
Exactly. And there are a whole lot of phraseologies and tactics and things that are being done right now that are not understood, that could be better understood by bringing the people who are responsible for them to the table to have conversations about it.
Ty, you are a fascinating man, and this has been so enlightening. Thank you for coming on the Ben Rob and Robbo show today. We genuinely appreciate it.
Thank you for having me, man.
It's the Ben Rob and Robbo, Ben Rob and Robbo.